Hello and welcome to the Cinementalist podcast for Cinementalist.com. My name's Andy. Sitting next to me is Floki. Sitting opposite me is Liam. And we're back.
We are indeed.
Feels good to be back in the room again, doesn't it?
It's nice, yes.
Yes, we are here once again to talk to you about film, TV, and, well, actually on our return episode, I have a film as well. It's a film special once again.
I was almost tantalised by when you have a little film to chuck in there.
Not my forte, but you know what? It's content, isn't it?
Well, I like it when you do it.
At least someone does.
There's a title. there's a good, hidden VHS title there. Well, DVD rather.
Yeah.
The kind of thing that you'd find marked with, a stick-it note hidden in the back behind some cupboards that you don't want anyone else to find.
That is the Cinementalist podcast, really, isn't it? Tucked in a cupboard where you don't want anyone to find it. Please do promote us. Anyway, yes, we are back. We're back in the room. Lim, how was your holiday? Your time
It was
off?
very nice, mate. Yeah, I had a very good, chilled out fortnight. Just did a lot of zoning out, staring into space, but also watching a lot of good content and traipsing around the country like a hooligan.
Traipsing about?
Yeah.
Making a nuisance of yourself?
Gallivanting around.
Gallivanting?
Gallivanting around like a fop.
I struggle to imagine you as a gallivanting.
Yeah, no, I didn't really much gallivanting. More sort of surly, moping.
Yeah. Standing on street corners, making people nervous.
Yeah, just giving them that look like, don't fucking look at me. Don't look at me. Don't engage me in conversation. Go away and leave me alone.
And we wonder why our viewership, listenership isn't higher.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's get back to business. Let's kick off with a bit of film news like we haven't been away. Wouldn't you believe, you'd think being off for 2 weeks that a load of news would stack up. And I still struggle to find interesting stuff. I managed to get a few articles, though. It's just that time of year, I suppose.
Oh, God. Well, there's start with a bit of deflation. I was excited for some good news.
Sorry, did I drop the energy then? I'll pick it back up. Leonardo Dicaprio.
Oh, yes.
Leonardo Dicaprio. I haven't heard from him in a while, although he's got a couple of big films coming up. This is from RottenTomatoes.com. Last time we saw Leonardo DiCaprio in a theatrically released feature film was in Quentin Tarantino's 2019 film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Although that film was primarily about the friendship between a cowboy TV star and his stuntman best friend, the cult led by Charles Manson also figured heavily in the film's B-plot and final sequences. Coincidentally, DiCaprio's newest project is also about a real-life cult leader responsible for several deaths, as he is in final negotiations with MGM to star in the 1970s set historical drama Jim Jones. James Warren Jones organized his followers at a settlement called Jonestown in Guyana in South America, where he eventually orchestrated the mass suicide of over 900 followers and the murders of others. Leonardo DiCaprio will also produce Jim Jones through his Appian Way production company. Jim Jones does not yet have a director, but it does have a screenwriter in Scott Rosenberg, whose recent films include the 2 recent Jumanji movies and the Marvel Comics adaptation Venom.
So Leo is going to be playing Jim Jones.
One would assume, yeah, he's the big star, so presumably he's in the lead.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like a sort of, just looking at the appearances of both men, it just seems like a bit of a wildly left field casting choice. Not in terms of talent, because Leo is very good.
Well, Leo's been doing his best over the years to transform into Jack Nicholson.
Yeah, he's doing that very slowly, isn't he?
Yeah.
So, is there nothing more on, is it stagnating at the moment, news about Killers of the Flower Moon?
At the end of this article, what it says is, before Jim Jones, DiCaprio can be seen in Netflix's Don't Look Up, 12/24/2021, and Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon, 10/14/2022. So 14th of October, apparently, next year for Killers of the Flower Moon.
Hell.
Yeah, it takes its time to Scorsese, but it's normally worth it. But yes, we're going to see Leonardo DiCaprio. But correct me if I'm wrong here. You're the expert on cults. This is the drinking the Kool-Aid, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And even more disturbingly, it was only the mass suicide. It was really murder because it was compelled suicide. It was like drink the poisonous Kool-Aid or, we'll dispatch you in,
I remember the
ways that are worse. So.
I remember the helicopter footage with all the bodies lying on the ground. It's really horrific. It looks like a genocide, which I suppose it kind of is.
Well, I mean, it's weird because that whole series of events is, I know it's quite grim to say so, but it is really ripe for, I'd say, especially the kind of motion picture adaptation that DiCaprio can get, like the ball rolling on something like grand and very polished. Because there's been some TV movies and there's been some mini series, but I mean, even before the whole the mass suicide, the way that Jones set up that settlement, and also the assassination of what was his name, Senator Ryan, who was sent over there in a sort of like ambassadorial capacity, and ended up being brutally like murdered by the cult in sort of like a very depressing real life action film sequence. It's mad stuff. And,
it is surprising that it hasn't been done on a big scale release before. But and as you said, Leonardo DiCaprio is sinking his teeth in getting his production company.
Well,
involved. Passion project, maybe. I mean, this seems like it's got some good legs. This is a good story.
With him helming it, I'm definitely very, very interested in seeing that. So, another thing to keep your eyes peeled for.
Absolutely. Second article this week. This is from filmnews.co.uk. Brian Cox will make his directorial debut on Glenrothen. The Succession actor will also star in the movie, which is described as a love letter to the star's native Scotland and is set against the backdrop of a thriving whiskey distillery town in the Highlands. The film tells the story of two estranged brothers reuniting in the land of their birth. The last time they spoke was on the day of their mother's funeral when, after a violent exchange with their father, the younger of the two left their Highland home for the US. 40 years later, the brothers finally reunite, back on Scottish soil, and in the village that houses the family business, the Glenrothen Distillery. Glenrothen has been created by Scottish actor and writer David Ashton, who has co-written the script with Jeff Murphy. It is described as a story of family, forgiveness, and the bonding alchemy of whiskey.
Well, I really like Brian Cox. I've very dismayed to say, dismayed at myself that I haven't actually began to watch Succession, even though it's something that's been on the back burner.
Guess what I've been doing with my time off while you've been having your time off?
Watching Succession?
I have indeed. I've been catching up with Succession.
Cool.
I'm up to date with it, actually, but I'm going to review it next week.
Oh, sweet.
So watch out for that one. I thought there's a big film I want to review first that we should get out of the way before then. But,
sure,
Yes, I'll give you my thoughts on Succession.
I mean, Brian Cox in general is just, he's amazing. I know it's a very contentious opinion, but I am actually in the camp that finds his Lecter a bit more interesting than Anthony's, even though I love Anthony's incarnation of it.
Yeah, it was one of his breakthrough film roles, wasn't it?
1986. He was
known for all his Shakespearean stage stuff prior to then.
The first guy to play Hannibal the Cannibal, and he's also just illuminated many films with lots of great bit parts and focal performances and a lot of independent efforts. He's just, I really like Brian Cox. I've got time for anything that he's in.
Yeah, he's one of those really accomplished old thesps that sort of brings a bit of Shakespearean gravitas to everything he does, and very much so in Succession as well. Although I shall get onto that next
very
week.
Politically acute dude as well. Loves going on Question Time and shouting at people.
Yes, isn't he trying to promote Scottish independence?
Well, he's a proper Scottish. He's an SNP, quite a firebrand guy, but he's pretty adept at taking apart loonies and twits.
Yes.
On programs like that. So, just a very compelling guy to watch all in all.
It'll be interesting to see what he does at this, I was going to say late stage in his career. I mean, there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with him. I think he's one of those people that will go on forever.
Yeah, he's 75. It's not ancient.
Yeah, it's still quite old for a directorial debut. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, he's worked with a hell of a lot of very, very good directors. It'll be interesting to see how that transfers over. But it sounds like it might be an interesting little film, that one.
Yeah, definitely.
Article here from CNET.com. The next Predator movie is called Prey, and it's coming to Hulu in 2022.
It's just a prehistoric one.
Well, we thought it might be prehistoric. Actually, that seems to be wrong. In fact, everything we've covered on the news so far has been wrong because we've been reading from articles that have been wrong. Last time we read it out on the podcast, it was called Skulls, and it looked to be a prehistoric thing. Whereas we now know it's called Prey. Headed for a streaming service Hulu in the summer of 2022. The new action thriller was confirmed Friday during Disney Plus Day, an event where Hulu parent company Disney teased upcoming Marvel, Star Wars, and Pixar films and TV shows. Prey will join other Hulu films like No Exit, The Princess, and Rosalind, also streaming next year. Prey is set in the year 1719 and sees Naru, a fierce young Native American woman, yearning to prove her worth as a warrior, bringing her face-to-face with the infamous movie monster on a new hunt. Previous reports suggested this next Predator film was being developed by 10 Cloverfield Lane director Dan Trachtenberg under the name Skulls. So yes, the internet has been ablaze with new Predator news and all of it has been wrong. It's called Prey, not Skulls, and it's set in the 1700s, featuring a Native American woman. So I like immediately thinking about the theming of that tie-in of a young female warrior trying to prove herself, which is kind of exactly what the Predator does. It's the whole hunting for sport thing, isn't it? It's proving yourself to your your betters, I suppose, and cementing yourself.
I mean,
Rite of passage kind of thing.
I did the notion of the tale being set in prehistory. I must admit that sounded a little bit more interesting to me.
Yeah, I kind of wish it was.
Than an 18th century setting, but still, I mean, yeah, the Predator facing off against Native American warriors.
Yeah, it seems to be that way.
Well, I mean, that does actually.
And I imagine, be it featuring Native Americans at that time as well, I imagine they're probably going for a heavy subtext and comment on colonialism and all that kind of stuff. I hope they bring that into the mix in a successful way. I think it could be done too bluntly, but I think you can't do that period of history without referencing it at some point, just out of sheer duty, I guess, to the suffering of those people. I imagine there's going to be some of that in there, but we shall see. I mean, I like the idea of it. I'd much rather this than a new badly done Alien versus Predator film.
Yes, yeah.
I think there's more to be done with the Predator lands on Earth. We cover in one of our film idea sessions on the premium podcast, someone was talking about an alien Ragnarok. Like aliens are around during Viking times, which I kind of wanted to see. I mean, I'll take the Predator around during Native American times. Like,
yeah, I remember
sort of
that
extension of it.
Because I remember the person also said he acknowledged that Outlander with Jim Caviezel had already done basically
somewhere near it. Yeah,
but Beowulf is essentially Beowulf, but Grendel is an extraterrestrial that was a prisoner on his spaceship, which was. I mean, it's not an amazing film, but it's very entertaining. It's cool enough. So the melding of that sort of epic historical epics with sci-fi horror.
Yeah,
as long as it's handled correctly, is very, very intriguing.
I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with crossovers in general. I think crossovers are actually quite a good idea. It's just they so often fail because there's something off with the recipe. Yeah,
that's
I hope it manages to get past.
Well, I think we both sort of share a hatred of excellent ideas that are shoddily executed.
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
because there's been plenty of magnificent ideas. And I think what he suggested is a very cool idea as well. A kind of like extraterrestrial infused, Ragnarok, Valhalla-centric tale. But just as long as it's not directed by
Paul W.S. Anderson?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Keep them away from the franchise.
Thank you for completing that sentence.
Sorry, did I jump in?
No. It's good. It's a very good synergy.
Well, I've been hurt by Predator films before, and I'm sure I'll be hurt again. But I've got my fingers crossed for this one, as I always do. And my last article this week, this is from EmpireOnline.com. Now that Warner Brothers and Legendary have officially confirmed that Dune Part 2 will go ahead, director Denis Villeneuve is naturally busy figuring out the details for his planned second outing. That, though, isn't stopping him from speculating on a possible third film, and he already knows the source material. Talking to Entertainment Weekly, Villeneuve explained his thinking. I always envisioned 3 movies, he says. It's not that I want to do a franchise, but this is Dune, and Dune is a huge story. In order to honor it, I think you would need at least 3 movies. That would be the dream. To follow Paul Atreides and his full arc would be nice. Dune novelist Frank Herbert, of course, wrote 6 books originally. His son Brian has since worked with Kevin J. Anderson on a host of prequels, sequels, and spin-offs, following generations of Atreides over millennia and getting even weirder. Herbert wrote 6 books, and the more he was writing, the more it was getting psychedelic, Villeneuve explains. So I don't know how some of them could be adapted. One thing at a time. If I ever have the chance to do Dune Part 2 and Dune Messiah, I'm blessed.
Well, yeah, fuck it. I mean, if this ongoing adaptation of Dune does end up being, say, Dune Parts 1, 2, and 3, all I can say is, bring it on.
I like the way he's sounding a lot more confident with it these days as well. There was that whole speculation with the whole HBO Max debacle and the simultaneous releases and all that kind of stuff. He did seem kind of downhearted by the whole thing. The fact that he's now talking about 2 sequels suggests he's really, really committed still to the project. And Dune's had a fantastic reception as well.
Absolutely.
So
and it
all
deserves
is good in Denis Villeneuve's world, I think.
And it deserves that reception. I think he's doing the right thing. And listen, I mean, Peter Jackson made 3 bloody 3-hour films about the dildo baggins and all that shit. So I think, if there's going to be, if Villeneuve's Dune basically ends up being, say, 9 hours devoted to, a faithful and respectful rendering of the book, I'm very happy to hear that.
Yeah.
So,
all good news for the Dune series.
May he prosper with that.
Haven't the Dune fans deserved it at this point? I think.
I believe so.
To have a good director on board and some really fantastic films.
No, I've mentioned it before, but it's still, I just always bite when I see these weirdos on YouTube and Twitter talking about how, oh, well, like Dune is basically Villeneuve's Star Wars, isn't it? It's like, you should be just banned from watching anything because you don't know what you're talking about. You're a tosser and you need to go and learn your history. So, sorry.
There you go. So says Liam from his pulpit. Speaking of Liam's pulpit, actually, as you are no doubt aware by now, he is very much back. And thereby, we are getting a couple of film reviews.
We certainly are.
Liam, what have you been watching in your absence? What do you have to tell us about this week?
Well, I scurried along to the cinema several times during my fortnight furlough. And I eagerly traipsed off to see something that we, I think, raised several times on the podcast. And that is The Last Duel.
Yes.
So I think it might be out of cinemas now. I'm not 100% certain about that.
Had a terrible release in terms of box office revenue. We covered that on the news.
Yeah, I think the budget was about $100 million, and the box office, what was the opening weekend? It was something like 26 million.
Yeah, very disappointing.
Atrociously bad box office takings, which is really, really sort of infuriatingly disappointing to me. Because, well, this is Scott's adaptation of a non-fiction book by Eric Yeager from the early 2000s, The Last Duel, and it covers the last judicial duel, which is essentially another term for trial by combat, which many people will be familiar with the notion of if they've watched things like Game of Thrones or studied some medieval history. You know, the process of guilt or innocence being determined by whether someone lives or dies in a prearranged duel. And this covers the very last one of those to be recognised by the Paris Parliament. And it took place on the 29th of December, 1386. So you're in France, sort of during the 100 Years' War. It's proper medieval, sort of France in the late Middle Ages, more or less.
Yep.
And the film opens in 1370, and it opens with a skirmish from, I think, is it the Caroline War or the Caroline War, one of the phases of the 100 Years' War. And you have Matt Damon as Jean de Carogues, who is a knight, and he is flanked by his very faithful friend and squire, Jacques Legris, played by Adam Driver. They have a successful campaign. They return to their manor, and they go to swear fealty to Count Pierre d'Alençon, played by Ben Affleck. Now, Count Pierre is actually a cousin of the reigning monarch at the time, King Charles VI. And Charles has adjudicated that Pierre will be Jean de Carogues' overlord. He will be, he will essentially have command of him. He will be his mercenary knight of sorts, his house knight, or one of many. And first thing he does is start collecting a sort of fealty tax from the people under his charge. But unfortunately, Carogues is very broke after a lot of extended campaigns. And to try and remedy this, he enters into a marriage of convenience with Marguerite, who's a young woman played by Jodie Comer. And now Marguerite's father promises Jean a very handsome dowry in marriage. He will inherit several lands, which will be very, very financially beneficial and will sort of help square the many debts that he owes. But unfortunately for him, Jacques Legris, Adam Driver's character, he's a favourite of Count d'Alençon. And Count Pierre ends up gifting one of the lands that was previously promised to Jean in this dowry. And when Jean kicks up a fuss, Pierre further antagonises him by giving Jacques the captaincy of a fort that Jean's father and grandfather held before him. So Jacques Legris and Jean de Carogues, previously very good friends, one's a knight and one's a squire, but essentially a rivalry that is more or less instigated by Ben Affleck's very bitchy count, really sours the relationship between them. And things reach a very, very nasty head indeed when Jean returns from another military campaign and Marguerite takes him up to their quarters in their home and says, I have something to tell you. While you were away, Jacques Legris was here with another man and he raped me. And so Jean is outraged and he goes before the king and demands to settle the matter in trial by combat. Therefore, you have the Last Duel.
Okay.
Pretty simple setup.
Yeah. With you.
This film is easily going to be on my end of year list. This is one of Ridley Scott's best films.
Really? That's a hell of a statement.
Absolutely. From the opening shot, opening on a battle in 1370, that crisp immersiveness of the cinematography, the kind of cinematography that Scott's great films have become associated with, that real immersive, epic scale look and atmosphere, the kind of thing you see in The Duelist, in Alien, in Blade Runner, in Gladiator, in Black Hawk Down even. That is there in spades. The action sequences in the film are excellently done. It's one of those instances where Scott has not missed a beat in attention to detail and realistically confronting the viewer with the sort of the grime and the mercilessness of affairs in that time period, just day-to-day life and, the way that these kind of disputes were resolved and the way that these matters could escalate into phenomenally ugly proportions, because in this instance, these guys are dealing with the only authority that they have any obligation to recognize. Things could, it could very quickly, depending on who you were in terms of social status, things could very quickly escalate into, brutal and fatal disagreements. The way that Ridley Scott introduces the audience to this atmosphere, the time of this atmosphere and the way of life is excellent. It is absolutely excellent. The screenplay is tight as anything. In fact, the focal incident, Marguerite's accusation of rape against Jacques Legris, the film is divided into 3 chapters and it's told from 3 perspectives. It's the truth according to Jean Descartes, which is Matt Damon's character, the truth according to Jacques Legris, Adam Driver's character, and the 3rd chapter, which is simply titled The Truth, which is from the point of view of Marguerite. And which has a sort of, the narrative sort of takes on a Rashomon-esque quality in which the incident is relayed from that character's point of view. And something that has been a little bit controversial in this film is that this rape sequence is shown twice. First time it's shown from the point of view of Jacques Legris. And in that case, Marguerite, without trying to spoil too much, Marguerite essentially acts in a very sort of kind of ludic, coquettish way where it's very clear that her no is sort of like a, oh, stop it, coy kind of thing. Whereas when the incident is told from the point of view of Marguerite, it is nothing but one of abject horror where her no's are unequivocal and she is disgustingly assaulted. And I mean, both times they are, the latter one is tenfold a lot more horrific to watch, but both of them still very much call into question her place in society as a woman, because like overall the movie is really about the rivalry of these 2 men, these 2 egotistical, fundamentally unpleasant men who, depending on which POV is centered on, have they seem to have very delusional ideas about themselves. Because when their character is being seen, depending who the character is being seen by, whether it's a sort of the first point of view chapter of Matt Damon, he's obviously this rather chivalric, integrity-laden knight. Whereas when you get to Marguerite's point of view, the final stage of the film, he's actually just this arrogant, barbaric, misogynistic bastard who views what's happened to her as a property crime against him, as opposed to this horrible thing that's happened to her. So you have, it really is. It's like this multiple conflicting narrative, conflicted vantage points with a very respectable and subtly and intelligently told feminist message. And I was really intoxicated by this film. I absolutely loved it. The criticisms that I've heard from certain people about Matt Damon and Ben Affleck and their accents, I came away from the film and I thought, well, what they did, what Damon and Affleck and Driver did, they essentially tightened their natural American accents so that it's basically sounded something approaching a bit more of a thespian kind of flick of the tongue. Well, Russell Crowe does that in Gladiator.
Yeah, it's that classic thing, all Romans are British.
Well, yeah, I mean, somebody whose name was actually Maximus Decimus Meridius wouldn't have spoken like this. And Harvey Keitel and Keith Carradine in The Duelists, they sound transatlantic. Napoleonic officers didn't talk with a fucking transatlantic accent. So this criticism that's directed at Damon and Affleck primarily in this instance, I came away from it thinking to myself, like, well, I haven't heard the same kind of slating directed at the aforementioned films, and I don't hear it directed at, Charlton Heston playing El Cid, Charlton Heston playing a Moor. Did the average Moor sound like Charlton Heston? I've been frustrated by this criticism. I don't think it's a fair one. And I think that there's plenty of historical epics that are much beloved including the other Ridley Scott films I mentioned, where people just they don't really bring up the fact that a Roman soldier would not have spoken the Queen's English and that Napoleonic officers wouldn't have spoken with sort of upper class American accents. So I just think don't give the Last Duel that kind of shit. I think it's a bit of a bullshit criticism. I really, really liked this film. It's a solid film. It's Ridley Scott back to his best. It's an excellent movie. If you haven't seen it, find a way to see it because it is one of the best movies of 2021. No equivocation.
Wow, very pleased to hear it.
Yeah.
As a big Ridley Scott fan, I should be checking it out.
Absolutely, please do. And then next up, sort of bit more scaled down than the previous mention. This is a little independent film that I've been looking forward to for several months now. I believe I mentioned it on one of the premiums. This is a movie called Bull. It's written and directed by Paul Andrew Williams. Now, Paul Andrew Williams, I loved his directorial debut, London to Brighton, starring Lorraine Stanley and Johnny Harris and Sam Sproul and others. It was the kind of gangster film that I really like. We've talked before about how essentially want a sort of comprehensive, sort of holistic return to the kind of gangster film where they are just vicious, nasty, humorless bastards, and it shows them for what they really are, and they're not people who are flash and impressive and quotable and, make you eager to emulate. We want a sort of tenfold return to the nastiness of the crime films of yore, particularly the British organised crime films of yore. And London to Brighton did that very, very well. Paul Andrew Williams he went on to do stuff like The Cottage and Song for Marion, Cherry Tree Lane, which wasn't a bad social horror, but he moved away from the template that he used in London to Brighton. And I'd always wanted to see him really return to that. Cherry Tree Lane was entertaining enough, but I really wanted to see him nail that kind of nasty, horrible gangland flick like he did with his first time in the hot seat. Well, I'm very happy to say that he's actually done it again because Bull stars Neil Maskell as the title character. We're not given any other name other than Bull. I'm assuming it's some kind of nickname. And as the film opens, he is being driven by sort of a largely unseen man sitting to his right in a Range Rover down one of the back streets of what appears to be, I think, South London. They pull up next to a garage and the guy hands Bull a revolver and he gets out the car and he walks up to a guy you can just about make out standing in the doorway of this garage, this body shop. And Bull guns him down and then walks back to the Rover, chucks the gun in the front seat and then just walks off. And then we next see him at the house of this couple and he has tied up the husband and is torturing him. And the lady of the house, the woman, runs downstairs, sees her husband injured and trying to howl with a lot of duct tape over his mouth. And she sees Bull sitting in the chair with a knife. And she says, "What the fuck are you doing here?" At which point he proceeds to brutally dispatch her. And it becomes clear that this chap, Bull, who has just exploded onto the scene with furious violence, he hasn't been around this neck of the woods for 10 years. But when he was last here, he was an enforcer for a particularly nasty crime syndicate, headed up by a man named Norm, played by the excellent Scottish actor David Heyman, who always makes a very good, grizzled, heartless thug, and he delivers that in spades here. Well, Norm, as well as being Bull's mob boss, is also his father-in-law. Bull is married to Norm's daughter, Gemma, and they have a young son called Aidan. Bull and Gemma, their relationships become very fractious because she has started to use heroin and become very promiscuous and just make life very, very difficult for Bull. So Bull wants to get Aidan, he wants to get their son, who's only about 9, 10 years old. He wants the kid to come and live with him. And he says to Norm, and he says to the rest of the firm, she can have all the money I've got, she can have the fucking house, she can have like all of my assets, I don't care, but I want the boy. And Norm says to him, well, no, he's my grandson. That's not going to happen. You're just going to have to fuck off. And it's as simple as that. And with the 10-year timeline, it darts back and forth between the mounting tension between Bull and his wife and her father, who is also his employer, and the rest of the criminals in this little outfit they've got. And it slowly revealed what actually finally ended up happening a decade ago and why Bull has come back and the sort of swath of utter destruction he cuts while rectifying the wrongs that have been done to him. So it's pretty simple setup, very like good boilerplate setup. Now, I thought this film was a great return to the kind of spirit in gangster movies that we've discussed before. It's a lean, vicious, muscular, just unapologetically bloody film that doesn't fuck about with basically any kind of character-related loftiness or any kind of, postmodern hip posturing, blah, blah, blah. It is straight as a die, right down the middle. These are horrendously awful people, believably nasty, vicious motherfuckers that it is quite a task to spend 88 minutes with. But you know me, I love that sort of thing. So, I just make any bones about it. But as tight and unforgiving as this film is, and as ugly as the violence is, which it is, the violence in this is very full throttle. There are no punches pulled in this. And this scummy unlikability of the majority of the characters, the film ultimately manages to transcend this. And it fundamentally becomes about the love that a father has for his son. And in that way, it's actually I found it very, very emotionally compelling. You know me, I'm a massive fan of Neil Maskell. I love Neil Maskell. I've talked about that before. Here, he delivers this dualistic performance because his acting is completely different depending on which timeline the film is focusing on. And he brings that real kind of down-to-earth London, likable sort of fella, you get on really all right with him as long as but don't take the piss. He brings that authenticity in spades, but he also brings this sort of almost PTSD, sociopathic vacantness with him when dealing with the contemporaneous narrative of the film. And it's really, really great watching him switch in between those modes. And the reason for those modes, it's not just as simple as, well, there was an event that kind of traumatized him a bit, so now he's sort of a bit more dulled in emotional affects. There's a reveal in this. At some point in this film, there's a reveal. I'm not going to say what it is, but it's a reveal that has so far been very, very divisive. It's a bit of a batshit reveal. And I must admit, when I went to see this at the cinema, when I saw this reveal, I was sat there like, wow, okay, they're going down that road. That's very interesting. But I came away from it and I couldn't stop thinking about the film for hours and hours on end, primarily because of that. And ultimately in a good way, because this development I'm talking about, it is telegraphed by the atmosphere of the film. And it sort of schisms the genre of the film to a point. but I actually think that it's sort of it pulls the rug out from under you, and it does it in a way that I do think is really really memorable. And I've seen a lot of people giving it flack, and it's not that I don't empathise with the flack that they're giving it, but I actually think that it was it's not something that I would agree comes completely and utterly out of left field, because for it to do that, it would have to mean that there's nothing whatsoever about the film's aesthetics that signal a possible foray into the route that it goes down. And I actually think that there is. And there's nothing better to me than a twist that really, really catches you off guard, but still kind of fits, maybe elusively at first, but it still kind of fits. And I thought that Bull did that really well. Yeah, love Neil Maskell and David Heyman's performance. I found there's actually some real poignancy to be found in there amongst the brutality, the extreme brutality. If you like mob films, if you like proper English mob films, Bull is a terrific example, and I'm really glad I went to see it. And if you can catch it somewhere, please go and see it, because it's very much worth it.
Oh, interesting stuff. I'm very intrigued by that one. I should give it a look.
Please do.
Okay, then. Well, it has come the time, Liam, the time I do a film review. And I did it.
You did it.
I went and I saw No Time to Die.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The latest James Bond. So strap on your tuxedos, load your Walther PPK, and here we go into Bond territory. I'm not going to do much preamble on this one because it's a James Bond film.
Everyone knows what happens, essentially.
Well, yeah. I mean, maybe not in this one, though, although we'll get onto that in a minute. But yes, we are in firm Bond territory. There has been a lot of superlatives thrown around for this film. I think it's been impossible not to notice. The whole riveting, amazing, best in the franchise, all this kind of stuff. You see all the posters around with the 5 stars, etc., etc. So I thought I'd give it a look for myself and for you guys as well, of course. But let's get into the setup on this. So this starts out with an overhead shot, an establishing shot of a lone figure moving through a snowy forest. And the figure is, top of his head's not shown, but we see that he's carrying an assault rifle. And he's approaching a lone cabin, which is resting on top of a frozen lake in the middle of these very Nordic-looking woods. We cut to the interior of the cabin, and we see a little girl lying on her bed, and she's playing with a Tamagotchi, which sort of dates the scene as
Bloody
to
hell.
where we are. Yeah, remember Tamagotchis?
I do indeed, yeah.
No, she's lying on her bed playing with a Tamagotchi, and we hear her mother calling to her in French. And she calls out, Madeline, Madeline, bring me my medicine. Her medicine turns out to be another glass of wine because her mother is sort of lolling on the sofa downstairs, chain smoking and drinking wine after wine after wine. So Madeline gets up, sort of rolls her eyes a little bit and brings her another glass of wine to the living room. And she sits down next to her, and they're next to these big windows looking out over the frozen lake. She sits down next to her and says that she's anxious for her father to get home. And her mum leans forward and asks her, what does she think her father does? And Madeline responds, well, he's a doctor. And the mother laughs and says, your father isn't a doctor. He kills people. And she sort of goes back to lolling drunkenly on the sofa. So much so, in fact, she's so drunk that she drops her glass of wine. So Madeline, being the good little girl she is, goes into the kitchen and gets some cleaning supplies. And when she comes back, she's scrubbing the carpet where her mum's drops this glass of red wine. When she looks up out the window and sees this lone figure approaching, she starts shaking her mum, trying to wake her up, going, there's someone coming, but she can't wake her mother. She looks up again, and suddenly this figure is right next to the window. In a very obvious kind of, it's a jump scare, essentially. And I feel bad for revealing a jump scare, but we're literally 2 minutes into the film at this point. But it did actually make me jump because this figure is wearing a white Asian-style mask. A mask that looks a bit like maybe a 1700s depiction of a geisha. It's a very creepy mask. And suddenly he's at the window in front of her. So Madeline goes scrambling away back through the house. She's tapping furiously at a keypad to a locked room in the house and then sort of disappears. And we get our masked figure breaks his way in and walks his way into the front room where Madeline's mum is lying on the sofa. And he tells her that his name is Lucifer Safin and that Mr. White, the woman's husband and the father of Madeline, has killed his family and he's here for revenge. He points his assault rifle at the mother and opens fire, killing her stone dead. The masked figure is now stalking the house, gun raised, and he's looking for Madeleine. He knows the little girl must be in the house somewhere. And he goes upstairs to the bedroom where she's hiding under the bed and doesn't find anything there. And as he turns to leave, her Tamagotchi starts beeping. So he turns, he raises his rifle. Before he gets a chance to fire, Madeleine leaps up with a pistol and unloads round after round after round into his chest. Probably about 6 or 7 rounds into this guy's chest. And he falls backwards over the railing down to the living room below. Madeleine's, of course, very shell-shocked by this. She's emptied this clip into this random guy. She's heard her mother get murdered downstairs. She makes her way down. She grabs the heels of this body that's now prone on the floor, and she starts dragging him out into the snow.
How old is this girl, sorry?
She's about 7 or 8, I would say.
Okay.
So, yeah, she just unloaded a pistol into this guy and is now dragging him backwards through the snow. So we now get another overhead shot where we see that this masked figure, the mask is now broken from the gunfire. We can just see the bottom half of his face, kind of Batman style. And there are all of these sort of pulsing black veins around his mouth. He's obviously not a well man to begin with, but she's dragging him backwards through the snow. And suddenly she slips on the ice. And as she goes to get back up, the figure suddenly gasps and sits bolt upright in a very zombie horror movie kind of fashion. Madeleine freaks out. She starts running across the frozen lake, and the figure begins to give chase in a very lumbering Mike Myers kind of way. Madeleine makes it into the middle of the lake and notices that the ice is cracking beneath her feet. Suddenly, the ice gives way beneath her and she falls into the frozen water. The figure speeds up and makes his way towards her, and he can see her struggling underneath the ice, like she's sort of framed in a window beneath him. She's punching at the ice above. He pulls his assault rifle. He starts firing into the ice, creates a hole, grabs her, and pulls her out. We then get a smash cut to Madeleine, all grown up, and she is emerging from the sea in much nicer surroundings. If you haven't figured out already, and I'd forgotten this, by the way, because there's been such a huge gap between these Bond films. Madeleine was Bond's squeeze in Spectre. She was the Dr. Madeleine, she was the daughter of Mr. White, who was the contract killer that supposedly killed this guy's family. There's the point in the film where I'm like, oh yeah, I remember you. I remember that was a film when there was a narrative and I was supposed to pay attention to it. I honestly think with this film, you would be really, really do yourself a favor and watch the rest of the Daniel Craig era Bond films beforehand, because it does a lot of callbacks to this sort of thing. It's been such a long time. I sat there going, shit, I'm supposed to remember this narrative and I've forgotten it entirely. So do yourself a favor if you watch this, because you'll get a better experience out of it. But anyway, put two and two together on that one. Now, Madeleine is, of course, James Bond's current squeeze, and they're on holiday in Italy together. And they're having a lovely time. They're driving around the Italian mountains in James Bond's vintage Aston Martin. They're laughing, they're joking, they're just having the experience of a lifetime. How you imagine sort of a honeymoon scenario would be in your head with this beautiful girl, your beautiful Aston Martin. And that's where all the power fantasy of James Bond comes in, right? And they're staying in this beautiful little Italian mountain village. And when they pull into the village, they are taken up to a beautiful little hotel. And they notice that the locals are performing a cultural ceremony. They're burning these bits of paper. And Bond asks the concierge what they're burning these bits of paper for. He says, oh, it's a local festival. We do this every year. They burn bits of paper with their secrets, wishes, hopes, and desires on them in the hope that it's sort of like a letting go of the past kind of ceremony. So Bond and Madeleine get to their hotel room and, of course, make instant passionate love because he's James Bond and he can't go 5 minutes. Can't go 5 minutes without shag from James Bond. They make passionate love and they're lying on the bed afterwards. And Madeleine brings up Vesper. Now, do you remember Vesper Lind from Casino Royale?
Yeah.
This was Bond's squeeze that betrayed him, ended up working for Spectre, all that kind of stuff, cut him up entirely. There's a bit at the end, oh, the bitch is dead, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I'd forgotten that too, but suddenly something went off in my brain going, I should have been paying attention. But anyway, she mentions Vesper Lind. And the reason she's taken him to this beautiful Italian mountain village is that Vesper's tomb, her grave, is up on a hillside nearby. And she thinks it'll be good for Bond to sort of, they're having this ceremony with the burning of the letters and things, to let go of his past, to let go of this love affair that went horribly wrong and scarred him brutally. That, you know, he can come here and he can sort of purge his demons from his soul. So the next morning, Bond wakes up and decides to sort of take her up on her offer. So he's taken up into the mountains where he finds this mausoleum where all these bodies, sort of Italian graveyards where the tombs are actually sort of stacked on top of one another and you get a door rather than a grave in the ground.
Yeah.
Sort of these doors with inscriptions on the front. And he finds Vesper's tomb and he pulls a handwritten note out of his pocket that says, "Forgive me," and he burns it. And as he's standing there having a moment of mourning, he notices there's some flowers left outside her tomb and a business card is in amongst the flowers. He pulls the business card out and looks on it and he sees the symbol for the Spectre organization. It's at this point he hears a couple of beeps and the tomb explodes in front of him, throwing him backwards.
Of course it does.
This gigantic explosion where James Bond sort of ragdolls almost off a mountain, which is just completely and utterly unsurvivable. But hey, he's James Bond. He's proven a million times that you can't explode James Bond. Anyway, so he gets up completely shell-shocked and he notices one of the guides that has taken him up the mountain, this young boy, is running off into the distance. He obviously knew this explosion was about to happen. So Bond being Bond, he gives chase. And we get this big sequence where he's running across a bridge and he notices that the other side of the bridge, there's a car coming towards him. He has to duck underneath this little bit of wall that happens to be there that was really convenient, that spins the car off the bridge. And then some motorbikes turn up and there's more people chasing him. So he jumps off the side of the bridge and he grabs a bit of steel cable and he swings to a platform underneath it, which is really bloody convenient. But then he's James Bond. That sort of thing happens to him. And now he's on this platform underneath and he's running away and he's running away. And suddenly this guy on a motorbike comes and confronts him, but James Bond vaults him off the top of the motorbike and they get into a fight and there's punching and kicking and smashing and walls and bleeding and all this sort of stuff. James Bond finally gets the better of this henchman-looking guy that he knocked off the motorbike and he grabs him by the throat and he pulls him up towards him. And the henchman gives him one line: "Blofeld sends his regards."
Dun, dun, dun.
Or rather, dang, 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 dang,
Yeah.
dang, 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 dang. So James Bond's been betrayed once again by a woman that he was screwing. I mean, it happens. Or has he really? You'll have to watch the rest of the film to find out. Now, as you've probably figured out by now, there is a bigger overarching plot going on with this film. That's as far as I'm going to go into it. Because the bigger overarching plot comes in about 20 minutes to half an hour later. So I don't know how long you want this podcast to be, but I'd have to do another half hour's worth of exposition to get to the bigger overarching plot. But yes, we're still in Spectre territory. James Bond is still grieving Vesper. Now he's got a new girl, except she's potentially betrayed him as well. The next sequence happens 5 years later, so Bond has gone into retirement. And we have, of course, Safin, the mysterious masked man at the start of the piece, played by Rami Malek. He's the new big bad for this James Bond film. Am I okay with leaving the setup there?
Yeah, I think I'm following you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's got quite a lot of plot, this. I mean, it's 2 hours and 40 minutes long.
2 hours and 40 minutes?
Yeah, and we're about 15 minutes in at this point. But like I said, I'd have to do the rest of the podcast, the next premium podcast even, to explain how we get to the main plot of the piece. Okay, then, what to say about No Time to Die? Let's start off by talking about Spectre, the previous James Bond film. I didn't think Spectre was very good at all. And weirdly, it wasn't a bad film. It was just a bad James Bond film. For me, it felt really, really flat. It had some set pieces. It had some action sequences. It was trying to tick the Bond boxes, but everything felt a little bit two-dimensional and grey and weirdly not fun for a James Bond film. No Time to Die as a piece obviously realizes that this was a problem with Spectre because you get about 5 huge action sequences in the first hour of the film. I mean, it's like it's taken the action sequences that it wanted to do in Spectre and it's thrown them into No Time to Die instead. So you get James Bond vaulting a motorbike up some stairs in the Italian mountains, and then you get a ridiculous bit where his Aston Martin is revealed to have miniguns behind its headlights. And then you get a bit where he's assaulting a Cuban party it's just action sequence after action sequence after action sequence, which I didn't particularly mind because the action sequences are, as you would hope for out of a really good Bond film, really, really well done. In fact, I'd go as far as to say they're actually sort of Nolan-esque. Now, a lot was made of Tenet, and Tenet being sort of Chris Nolan's version of a Bond film. That sort of, spy on the run kind of thing, who's betrayed who. Of course, that is like time-shifting.
I still
dynamic.
like Tenet. I don't care what people say.
Sure, yeah. But I know what they meant. It was kind of a Bond film. And in a weird way, I don't know who's aping who now. I don't know whether Tenet was aping James Bond and now James Bond is aping Tenet, or which way round it's all working. There were a lot of camera movements and things in the action scenes where I'm like, that's recognizably Chris Nolan. And, that is no bad thing. What I'm essentially saying is the action sequences, of which there are many, are very, very dynamic, kinetic, fast-moving, and well done, which, big tick in the good James Bond film box for you. I don't really know where to put this, so I'm going to put it in here. There's been a lot of discussion about this film as being too woke, that it's the woke James Bond. I didn't really get that out of it.
Can I guess, just offer a very brief guess as to why people are saying that?
Yeah, sure.
Is it by any chance because there's a black female 00 who doesn't get involved with Bond romantically or sexually, and the fact that Ben Whishaw is probably gay as he is in real life?
You've been reading some spoilers, sir.
No. Hand on heart, is that it?
Well, no. Let me address both of those directly. Yes, you've got Nomi, who's played by Lashana Lynch, and in James Bond's absence, remember we skipped 5 years later in the storyline. Given his absence, and it's the classic thing of James Bond's retired, but he has to be brought back in because there's unfinished business back at HQ. She is now the 007. She's actually taken up his number and his rank. And she is a side character. And I think they actually balanced it quite deftly between, you can't make the film about her because everyone's turned up to do a James Bond movie. Everyone wants to see what happens to James Bond. But at the same time, she's actually still quite a prominent part of the plot. I didn't feel like that was an issue in the slightest. Yes, a character is revealed to be gay in the most subtle of ways, by the way.
Her character is revealed to be gay?
No, a character. I'm not going to say which. But yes, a character is revealed to be gay, and it's done unbelievably subtly. It's almost a by-the-by thing that actually makes perfect sense for the character, and I didn't find pull me out of it at all. There is one fly in the ointment in regard to wokeness, in that at one point, James Bond is taken into a Cuban dignitary party, and his informant, the person that gets him in, is this very, very beautiful, supermodel thin woman in an evening gown that's cut right down the middle. So to quote Patrick Stewart from Extras, you can see everything. And she's in her kitten heels and everything, and her job is to get James Bond into this party. Well, as you would expect in a James Bond film, everything goes wrong. There's a big firefight, and suddenly she's shooting people, snapping people's necks. The Special Forces soldiers are flying over her shoulders, all this kind of stuff. And then at the end of the scene, James Bond turns to her and goes, "That was really good." And she goes, "Thanks." And then she disappears from the film. And I thought, you know what, actually, it could have done without that one. I get that you're trying to do female empowerment, but that was a little bit ridiculous. And it was obviously there just to be another ass-kicking woman when the film's actually already got an ass-kicking woman and it's working really, really well. I don't think you needed another one on top. This whole thing about James Bond's gone all sappy and it's gone all woke and it's for snowflakes kind of thing. I mean, I'd struggle to see how you're going to find this in this film. It's still that uber masculine James Bond super spy thriller thing.
That does sound really annoying because, I mean, you say this woman is also like very kind of svelte and like sort of averagely built.
She's a skinny supermodel type that all of a sudden starts snapping people's necks and things. And she's pretty much only there to do that. And then James Bond says, "I like that a lot." And she goes, "Thank you." And then she disappears. That did seem like a bit of forced writing.
Well, it is because she is no likelier to beat up a bunch of special forces goons than I, as a fucking 5'7", averagely built bloke, am able to. It's not like sorry if you're gonna like that. That does sound fucking stupid.
Yeah, it was unnecessary because you've already got an ass-kicking female character and it's actually working really well for the film. Putting another one on top just seems like sort of padding that to a degree that becomes artificial. But I didn't find it too egregious anyway. I mean, this film's got so many action sequences, you kind of forget that happens anyway. I had to wait. I woke up the next day going, "Oh my God, hang on a second, I've got to review this." There's 2 hours and 40 minutes worth of it. Oh, yeah, which bits am I going to pick out? There's a huge amount of film here. You know what I'm going to say next as well on that very, very point. It's 2 hours and 40 minutes long. What am I going to say?
You're going to say it's too fucking long?
What else am I going to say?
You're going to say it should have been 2 hours tops?
No, it's 2 hours and 40 minutes and it's baggy in the middle.
Oh, okay.
Which to me, every time I bring up a film and say that it's too long, it's always because it's too baggy in the middle. Only, I would say, by about 10 minutes. You could lose 10 minutes out the middle and it would be a tighter piece overall, but not too bad. Ultimately, you kind of have to review a James Bond film differently to other films. It's kind of got a different rule set almost. Because everyone knows it's patently ridiculous. Everyone knows the tropes that it's going to hit, the car chases, the love interest, the betrayal, all that kind of stuff. Everyone knows that's where it's got to go. You've got to sort of assess it by its own categorization and its own subclass of film. It's a genre in its own right. And the real question here is this an effective Bond film? I would say yes. And more than that, this film has to serve as a bookend, as a final note for Daniel Craig's version of James Bond. Now, this is a much loved version of James Bond. These films have been very successful. They haven't all been great, but overall, he's rebooted the franchise in a way that's made it more brutal, more realistic, more stylish. And I think in general, improved the franchise and took it to where it needs to be in the modern age. So really, you need to give him a big send-off. Does this film achieve that? I would say yes. It makes some really, really brave narrative conceits. There's one in the middle and there's one right at the end that are things that you wouldn't expect a Bond film to do. In fact, in a weird way, they're kind of canon breaking, which is odd because they don't quite have the impact they would otherwise because the audience is aware of the conceit of James Bond, which is every James Bond film, especially when you get to the end of an actor and a new actor's going to come in, the whole canon reboots. So what this film does is it actually breaks the James Bond canon a couple of times in the full knowledge that, well, it won't matter anyway, because by the time we do the next one, it's almost like it's the Doctor Who thing. It's almost a different Bond entirely. You know, the actor who plays him has changed, but the character's the same. So it's gone for some narrative jumps and leaps that I didn't expect it to make, and I think that was brave. As I said, they're not as effective as they may have been, but I still like the fact that they were that dangerous with the writing. It's such a beloved character to make these changes, and obviously I'm dancing around spoilers here. To make these changes, I thought was actually an intelligent, if not entirely successful move, but it adds some interest to the film that you wouldn't otherwise expect. It's too long. It's got maybe one too many action sequences, and I have to say Rami Malek as well in his villainous performance. It's a little bit too close for me to Javier Bardem's performance in Skyfall. I don't think that's Rami Malek's fault, but it's that same sort of leering, hissing, sinister, creepy, should be out of a horror movie kind of villain. I don't actually put any blame on Rami Malek for that. I put the blame on the writing, in that I don't think he had much else to do with it. This film sort of suffers from the two antagonists problem. And then you've got Blofeld, who after the events of Spectre is locked up, but obviously he gets wheeled out like Hannibal Lecter at one point, and he's the overarching villain of the piece. And so as a result, your second villain is going to suffer. He's not actually in the film much. And a lot was made about, oh, this is Bond's most dangerous adversary yet. I mean, yes, he's dangerous at points. Yes, the performance is quite good, but to be honest, he's probably got about 15 minutes of screen time in what is otherwise quite a long film.
Well, you mentioned Javier Bardem's performance in Skyfall. Yeah, the reason that he is probably my favorite Bond villain is because there are several ways in which he is actually he's just a lot more terrifying than a lot of other Bond villains, because they go in certain directions you wouldn't expect. Like, for example, he gets very, very gropey with Bond. You know, people have talked about the homoeroticism in Skyfall. Well, the reason he does that is to be psychologically abusive.
Yeah.
So does like Rami Malek's character, does he do similar things?
He doesn't really get a chance.
No.
I mean, this isn't a Bond film that's about the villains. It's a Bond film about Bond, because they want to tie up Daniel Craig's version of the storyline. I didn't mind it. I just thought it was a bit of a waste of Rami Malek. But it makes some brave decisions. It's got great set pieces. It moves at a good pace with the exception of about 10 minutes in the middle, which I can forgive it for. It's not too woke. And overall, you know, is it a good Bond film? Yeah, I'm just not prepared to give it the superlatives that a lot of other reviewers have piled on top of it. Oh, it's the best in the series. It's the best thing you'll see this year, all this kind of stuff. No. It's actually, in a way, kind of better than that, in that it's just a nice cinematic popcorn ride.
That's good, man.
That moves the way it's supposed to, and it wraps up Daniel Craig's storyline, Daniel Craig's Bond, in a way that I wasn't expecting, which I can't go into. So is it a successful Bond film? Yes. Is it a good cinematic experience? Yes. Are the action sequences stunning? Yes. It does all the things it needs to do. It's just not the greatest film of the year. And I'll end on that.
Fair enough. Well, I mean, mostly positive remarks, to be honest.
It's pretty good. It's pretty damn good. But like I said, Bond films exist in their own category, in their own universe. I only really have to compare it to other Bonds. But yeah, it's up there. I'd say it's in the top 5 easily. And that's pretty good going given that Spectre was a pile of whatever, So, hey, by comparison, it's a good ride. I enjoyed it. And
Cool. Yeah.
Okay, then. Well, to finish off, you did the last...
Bond trivia?
No, we've done too much Bond trivia. I've decided we're tired of Bond trivia. I'm sure the audience is tired of Bond trivia. So I thought I'd do some trivia on duels instead.
Ooh, tasty.
Yes, I thought so. Let's start out with this one. Eduard Manet and Edmund Durante. In February 1870, the French painter Eduard Manet flew into a fit of rage after reading a single dispassionate sentence about 2 of his works penned by his longtime friend, the critic Edmund Durante. The artist stormed off into Paris's Café Gaubois, slapped Durante in the face, and challenged him to a sword duel. According to police reports, the men faced each other on February 23rd in the forest of Saint-Germain. The adversary's swords allegedly struck only once, but with such force that both blades buckled. When Durante sustained a minor wound, Manet declared his honour sufficiently defended, and before long the 2 Parisians had patched up their relationship and were once again sharing meals at the Gaubois.
Wow.
French painters, man, hardcore shit.
Sounds like it had like an amicable...
Yeah.
Sort of,
yeah. A contemporary of William Shakespeare, Ben Jonson overcame a rough upbringing to become an accomplished playwright, poet, and actor. He also cultivated a bad boy reputation through his ruthless exploits as a soldier, his hard-drinking lifestyle, and his inflammatory writings. On September 22nd, 1598, he killed the actor Gabriel Spencer in a duel that may have arisen after the 2 men quarrelled over which theatre troupe was Elizabethan England's finest. Sentenced to hang for the murder, Jonson used a legal loophole known as the benefit of clergy, reciting a Bible verse to escape the death penalty. His property was ultimately confiscated and his thumb branded. Jonson's hit play, Every Man in His Humour, was produced the same year, with Shakespeare himself playing a role.
Wow.
Yeah, contemporary of Shakespeare, duelled, very nearly was killed for it.
Damn.
Acting used to be a lot more hardcore, I think. I mean, you can say every Richard Harris and Peter O'Toole story you like, but they never drew swords, I don't think.
Well, I mean, I don't know, mate.
Maybe, yeah.
I wouldn't put it past Richard Harris to go tooled up with things. The guy was a fucking lunatic. With all due respect, I love the man,
Duels are not just limited to men. In 1792, Lady Almeria Braddock took offence at a comment a Miss Ethelstone made about her age. According to some reports, Braddock claimed to be not yet 30, while Ethelstone said that she was actually more than 60. The women opted to resolve the spat by duelling in London's Hyde Park. Both women fired their pistols but missed. The duel could have ended at that point, but the women decided to try their hands at swords. After receiving a wound to her arm, Ethelstone said that she would write a letter of apology.
See, mate, I've seen a lot of, cat fights, women going at it, but...
we're going there, are we?
Knives and guns, I mean...
If only she'd written that letter of apology in the first place, they could have saved the sword fight, I suppose. That's referred to, by the way, as the petticoat duel.
Petticoat duel?
Yeah.
Just an added layer of misogyny
there.
Yeah. Mine was intending to be ironic. I don't know if I
hope that came across.
I don't know if I did that successfully or I just sound like a horrendous chauvinist prick.
Well, my last fact here, and I love this one. I always put my favourite at the end, as you know. And yes, this is fabulous.
Is it like the silly item at the end of the news entry in the trivia?
Kind of, yeah. It's got some pronunciation for me to chew over as well. So, as usual, apologies. 100 years after the petticoat duel, Princess Pauline Metternich and Countess Kilmansegg had an argument over floral arrangements at a musical exhibition. Understandably, the women decided to duel, topless. The reason? Any clothing pushed into a wound could cause an infection. The potential injury from a sword was oddly overlooked. With women serving as the seconds and Baroness Lubinska presiding, it was the first emancipated duel. After the men had turned their backs, the women began fighting with swords and each received wounds. As they cried out, the men attempted to provide aid. However, Baroness Lubinska beat them with her umbrella and called them lustful wretches, thinking their motives weren't entirely altruistic.
That sounds like a scene in a historical film directed by someone like fucking Ken Russell or something.
It sounds like Monty. It sounds like Monty Python to me. I love the idea of
like maybe X-rated Monty Python.
I love the idea that over a flower arrangement, 2 women came to duel topless, and it was broken up with the beating of an umbrella. I mean, I think that's kind of incredible. But there you go.
Yeah, that's just madness.
Absolute madness. Yeah, yeah. And the whole for an infection, I get that was a thing. So the cloth doesn't get pushed in the wound. But the men all had to turn their backs. Very good of them. I thought somebody sneaked a peek. They would.
Well, of course, they were saying, lustful wretches whose intentions are not pure. Like, number one of them could possibly be bleeding to death. Number two, what? You're swinging swords around, and I'm sorry, with all due respect, you've got your baps out. I mean, that there's some very grievous contingencies there. I just think it's very poorly thought out.
Well, yeah, that's how it was back in the day.
Well,
one flower arrangement, and that's it. The women are topless and they're fighting.
Just fucking anything. Yeah, well, we thought that we've met people who, anything makes them go off. So not so.
Anyways, that brings us to the end of our free podcast this week. We're going to go and record the premium one now. Liam's got a couple of extra takes to do. What are you reviewing this week?
I'm going to be taking a look at an Icelandic film that I loved very much called A White Day. And also, last weekend, just for fun, I binged through all 4 Scream films. And I had a very good time indeed. And because the 5th one is soon upon us, I just thought we'd talk a little bit about the franchise. Because I remembered the first film quite acutely, but the other ones had faded from memory. And some of the sequels are not actually as appalling as I remembered them being.
Oh, interesting.
So I just wanted to talk about Scream and why I find it fun and the hopes I have for the 5th installment. And just like a bit of a sort of bubblegum fiesta with that half of it anyway. A White Day is quite serious. So
fun.
We'll get into that.
An episode of contrast.
Yes.
And also, actually, you gave me an idea with the whole Last Duel thing, because I was going to do some sword fighting trivia, because it's actually a subject I know a fair bit about. And I thought, actually, that would only give me like 10 minutes to talk about it. And I'm a boring motherfucker, man. I can bang on about it for ages. So I thought what I'd do for my half of the podcast is to have a chat about movie sword fighting and why it's wrong.
Yeah, fair enough. Will you actually see The Last Duel, though?
I will.
Honestly, man, it's your kind of shit, and I loved it.
But movie sword fighting is wrong in many, many ways, and I'm going to bang on about it and hopefully be historically interesting as well, because sword fighting is fascinating.
Well, I am interested.
Excellent.
Well, how can sword fighting be boring? You said you're a boring motherfucker. How's sword fighting boring?
Oh, okay, yeah. So I was trying to work out what you're referencing there. Well, perhaps when I talk about it. But anyway.
If you want to do like 30 minutes about films that are centered on, I don't know, taxes, then yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. But yes, Andy's going to be talking swords. So if you'd like any of that, please do check out our Patreon page. You can find a link at cinementalist.com or just with a simple Google search. We release 4 premium podcasts a month talking about films, TV, and just an extended version of the podcast, really. So please do come along and sign up if you'd like more. Liam, anything to add?
Nah, well, it's nice to be back in this seat again, waffling on as we do.
Yeah, banging on about rubbish.
Absolutely. Well, it's what we've done all our lives, isn't it?
We're about to bang on about even more.
Even more bollocks, mate, yeah.
And you have to pay for it, which is even better.
It's a wonderful weekly ritual. I absolutely adore it. Yeah, I hope you guys have adored it as well. And just check out that shit. And if we don't see you on the premium, then hopefully you tune in next week.
Absolutely. Okie dokie, guys. Yeah, I'll only echo those sentiments. Hope to see you in the premium episode. If not, free one next week. Take it easy.